It is my pleasure today to welcome to the program Professor Olivier Sibony at HEC Paris, as well as co-author of the book Noise, A Flaw in Human Judgment, co-written by Daniel Kahneman as well as Cass Sunstein. Cass, a multi-time guest on the program before. Olivier, so great to have you on today.
Thanks for having me.
So maybe to start with, to kind of introduce some of the things we're talking about, many of us can imagine situations in which the inputs seem to be the same. It might be a situation where a patient goes to two different doctors with the same symptoms, or a driver is driving and there is a situation with some pedestrians and vehicles where the circumstances seem to be the same. But there's something we call human judgment that is applied, which sometimes gets each individual to make a different decision, whether it's driving, whether it's about a diagnostic test that a doctor wants to do. In your world, how do you start quantifying this X factor of human judgment and thinking about it in a way that we can start making some observations about it?
Let's first start by double-clicking on what you call human judgment here. Because in the examples you've taken, yes, we have human judgment. In some cases, we also have human judgment, but we don't mind variation. So say we are deciding what hotel we prefer in a foreign city, or what dish we prefer in the menu. It's fine if you and I disagree, right? That's not something where we expect uniformity. The problem that we've been writing about in Noise is when we have human judgments on which we expect uniformity, on which we think there is a correct answer. For instance, as you said, when a patient is visiting a doctor, the diagnosis should not be a matter of opinion. It should not be a matter of taste or preference. It should be a matter of professional judgment, and we pretty much expect that different doctors would come to the same judgment. And the problem is, quite often, they don't. And that's what we call noise, the unwanted variability in human judgments.
What are the factors what are the categories of factors that can create these differences? I remember reading about, in fact, it may have been a Daniel Kahneman book, now I don't remember offhand, about sentencing in criminal cases and how one factor that affected sentencing was, is it close to lunchtime or is it after lunchtime? In other words, how hungry is the judge seemed to play a role in determining a sentence. What category would that type of a judgment discrepancy fall under, and what types of categories are there?
So this category, the example you take here, which is a famous study of judicial decisions, is what we call occasion noise. Occasion noise is the fact that the same people looking at the same facts on two different occasions will sometimes not have exactly the same judgment. So a judge looking at the same defendant tried for the same case before lunch or after lunch will not have exactly the same judgment. And by the way, this is true also of factors such as the temperature, whether the weather is sunny or rainy, whether the judge's favorite football team won or lost the game the previous day, and whether the previous cases that the judge looked at were favorable or unfavorable. So there are a lot of factors that are going to influence a judge that are completely extraneous to the case, that should have nothing to do with the case but influence it. That's what we call occasion noise. It's variation within the person. And we can all feel this when we know, oh, I made that decision because I was in a bad mood. If I think back on it, I would have made a different decision now that I'm in a good mood, right? That's fairly intuitive. We're aware of that. We probably underestimate it, but we're aware of it. That's one of the categories.
Can you give us some of the other categories?
Sure. So another category, which is relatively easy to wrap your mind around, is, if you take again the example of judges, that people have different average levels of severity. So some judges are going to be tough, hanging judges. Other judges are going to be more lenient. They are, the bleeding heart judges who feel for the defendant. If you give these two judges the same 20 different cases, of course, each of the 20 cases is different, but the average sentence that the bleeding heart judge gives is going to be a lot less than the average sentence that the heart judge gives. That's what we call level noise. And then there is a third category, which is a bit harder to wrap your mind around, but which is actually the most important one. And it's easy to see if you think again of the judges. Take these two judges, the lenient one and the tough one. Not only do they disagree on the average level of their sentences, they're also going to disagree on each case. If you ask them to rank the cases from the worst case to the least severely punishable case, they are not going to agree on the ranking because basically they have different tastes. They are different individuals, they have different life experiences, they have different preferences, they may have different political opinions. Basically, they see different things in the cases that they look at. They have different patterns of judgment. And that's what we call pattern noise. So we have occasion noise, we have level noise, we have pattern noise. When you put all those things together, you have a lot of reasons for judgments that should be identical, ideally, to in fact differ and differ quite a bit.
So there are people who are maybe technocratic by nature who, when you present this to them, they would come up with a solution maybe when it comes to the sentencing question, or maybe when it comes to when a patient comes in with certain complaints, what's the path of testing that should be done, where they would essentially say, we need to eliminate some of this variability. We will use a computer program of some kind, artificial intelligence. We put in the inputs and it tells us this person should get 7 years in prison and everybody gets 7 years in prison. Or this patient should get the CAT scan, this one should not. That would be one approach to this. Does that account for the true nature of complexity with many of these situations, or would that solution leave something out that's important?
Well, there is a difficult trade-off to make here. What is guaranteed is that if you do what you've just described, you will eliminate the noise.
Yes.
Because whatever system, whatever rule, whatever algorithm, whatever formula you put in place is going to be noise-free. And that's why it's often, when you actually measure the performance of algorithms and rules and so on, it's often quite good. Because it eliminates the noise, the level noise, the occasion noise, the pattern noise, it basically makes sure that when you have the same inputs, you will have the same outputs. Now, does that necessarily make rules and algorithms a good thing? No, because noise is not the only way you can be wrong. You can also have bias. So suppose, to take an extreme but not completely crazy case, that you have a rule that says anyone who's been sentenced of this particular crime gets exactly this punishment. Or anyone who's been sentenced 3 times of a felony goes to jail for life. Three strikes and you're out.
Yes.
Well, you've eliminated noise there, at least if you apply the rule. But a lot of people would say you've created another form of error, which is a form of bias, which is that you are giving too severe a sentence to a lot of people who would not deserve that sentence. Yes, you've eliminated the unwanted variability between people who have committed the same 3 crimes, but you've added a lot of bias in the form of unwanted severity against people who have committed 3 not so bad crimes. So there's a trade-off between how accurate and how unbiased an algorithm or a rule can be, and the fact that it will be noise-free. Because that trade-off is a difficult one, there's going to be lots of cases where, in fact, you will have to continue to resort to human judgment. You cannot replace it with a rule, and therefore you need to try to make it better, less noisy, without eliminating the human component.
Where biases affect human judgment, sometimes it has been argued that being aware of these biases can help mitigate their impact. So whether it's availability bias or whether it's confirmation bias, that understanding that this is something that might impact our judgment helps us to reduce it. When it comes to noise, is awareness also useful in mitigating it in an individual, or is it less useful?
So first of all, for bias, there isn't actually a lot of evidence that simply being aware of biases is an effective, lasting, sustainable way to reduce your biases. It doesn't work that well. Awareness is good, right? It makes you more careful, but it's not in itself sufficient. For noise, it's even worse.
Okay.
Because here's the problem of noise. You don't know which way it's going to make you go wrong. You don't know of all the possible sources of noise, of everything that affects you in a particular occasion, of all your individual preferences that could be different from somebody else's, of all the factors that can influence you on a particular case, you don't know in what direction it's going to make you go wrong. So you need to actually take a stance that we call decision hygiene. That is a form of prevention against noise without knowing how noise is going to affect you. The reason we call it decision hygiene, which is slightly off-putting, and that's intentional, is that we liken this to washing your hands. When you wash your hands, you don't know what germs you're eliminating. You're not saying, oh, this is the COVID virus and this is the flu virus, and I've eliminated these two particular things.
Right.
And in fact, if you're successful, you will never know what problem you've prevented. But you know that it's good discipline, that it's good practice, that it's good hygiene. Likewise, everything that you do in your decision-making process ahead of the decision, ahead of time, to make your decision process more disciplined, is going to improve the quality of your decisions because it's going to make you less noisy.
When it comes to institutions versus individuals, noise at the institutional level sometimes can lead to what some call systemic types of biases. You could imagine how noise and human judgment might lead to racial discrimination in housing decisions, for example, or transportation decisions about where should the stops for the subway line be, which could be influenced by all of these types of factors. Do you approach institutional decision-making noise differently than, for example, a doctor or a driver making a decision about an individual patient, for example?
We actually view the doctor as part of an institution.
Okay.
When you only see one doctor, you will never know if your doctor is noisy. You go to your doctor tells you you have the flu, you go home, you take your medicine, and it gets better or it doesn't get better. You will never know whether another doctor in the same hospital would have told you, no, it's not the flu, it's COVID-19.
Right.
Or it's not the flu, it's something else. So if you think about who should take care of noise, it's actually always the institution. As individuals, we can try to make ourselves more disciplined, but the institution, whether it's the hospital, the justice system, the organization that takes care of hiring individuals, or the company that has a hiring process, all those institutions should try to reduce both the noise and the biases in their decisions. And if they put in place good decision hygiene practices, they will reduce noise. They will also, at the same time, reduce the sorts of systemic biases that you're talking about, because when you put in place good decision practices, you will make your decisions less exposed, less dependent, less sensitive to the biases of individuals.
The last thing I wanted to talk about is whether there are some cases where maybe both noise and bias are good in the sense that they're sort of what makes us uniquely human. And the example that I will give is, as we learn more about autonomous vehicles and the decisions that drivers are sometimes making almost intuitively in a fraction of a second about, for example, merging in a rotary or traffic circle, whether it's the right time or it's not the right time, or about getting through a yellow light or not. This is something that it's really been reduced to. It's happening in a very, very small amount of time. And we're sort of intuitively considering the position of pedestrians and how far we are from the light. In some of these cases, there will be variability, but it seems that it's actually quite hard to replicate it accurately with an artificial intelligence or with computers. What about those cases where noise seems to be a sort of uniquely human ability to make these judgment calls in a very small amount of time?
So we wouldn't call this noise. We would say that those quick decisions that you're talking about are system one decisions. They are decisions that are made without consciously thinking about what you're doing, and that are based on a lot of learning that has taken place. They can be excellent decisions. You can have great instincts if you have been well trained. You can have acquired expertise at something. So if you are a Formula One driver, your instincts to drive a Formula One car are extraordinarily fine-tuned, and you're able to make decisions in a fraction of a second that quite likely would be difficult for a computer to make. Now, is this a case of noise? We wouldn't call this a case of noise in the sense that those decisions are hypothetically, as you described them, good, they're actually consistent. The expert would make the same decision a lot of times when faced with the same situation. Where we would see noise is when a person making a decision is not consistent, and different people are not consistent with each other in the decisions that they make, and that creates variability. That is not the case in the example you were talking about, where presumably there may be humans who are better than machines, and that will remain the case for a long time in a lot of important decisions.
So it's really a different category altogether.
Yes, and there will be, I don't want to give the impression that machines are the solution to everything, and clearly they aren't, and that's why we're writing this book that actually talks not about how to eliminate human judgment, but how to replace it. There will be lots of decisions that we will want humans to make, either because it's too difficult to have a machine that makes it, or because we don't want the machine to make it in our place, because we care about dealing with a different human being. We want to give people a sense of agency. We want to give people who interact with the decision the dignity of dealing with the human being and not with the machine. There are lots of very valid reasons to retain human judgment. And when that is the case, we need to make sure that those judgments, if they cannot be the sort of expert snap-second judgments that you are talking about, that they are made in a considered, careful way so that they are less noisy, more just, and less prone to error.
That makes a lot of sense. We've been speaking about the book Noise, A Flaw in Human Judgment, co-written by Daniel Kahneman, Cass Sunstein, and our guest today, Professor Olivier Sibony. So great having you on. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much, David.